Hi, I'm Pilar Bewley, and today I want to chat with you about this question that comes up often, which is Montessori right for every child? And the short answer, in my opinion, is yes and no. And let me explain. Montessori as an approach to supporting your child's development is right for every child. But a Montessori classroom, which is where Montessori is seen and practiced most of the time, a Montessori classroom is not necessarily right for every child. And this can be shocking for some people when they first hear it, but I want to explain to you kind of how I came to this conclusion. So I was a classroom guide for a long, long time. And at one point, towards the end of my career, I actually had my son in my classroom. And even though, he was raised with a Montessori approach at home, and he had been at this school, which was a good quality Montessori school for several years, being in an elementary classroom for his first year of elementary was really, really tough for him. He was not thriving at all. And what was interesting was that for some children, this environment was wonderful and they were doing great, but there were a couple other children in that classroom for whom it was a huge struggle. So before I decided to leave the classroom to start homeschooling, another parent made the decision to pull their child out and begin to homeschool them. And the change in this child was just amazing. And this was also a child who had been in Montessori their whole lives. And he was older, I think he was like in third year. The change in this child was phenomenal in all aspects, behavioral, sleep patterns, emotional, everything shifted. And so when I decided to start homeschooling, I noticed the same thing. I mean, within 2 weeks, my son was a different person. People who knew us, friends from outside of school, started remarking on how many changes they saw in him. He was calmer, happier, more peaceful. He started retaining information that he couldn't retain before. He started trying things that he had been too hesitant to try out in the past. And I started talking to other parents who had taken their children out of Montessori school to homeschool. And they all had very similar experiences. So now I'm not saying that Montessori classrooms are bad for all children. By no means. I mean, they're amazing, supportive environments where the majority of children thrive. But even children who have Montessori backgrounds and who are with teachers who have, been in the classroom for a long time, they don't necessarily do well in a Montessori classroom. And there are many reasons for this. And 3 that I've noticed that really come to mind. One is the sensory overload. So if your child has diagnosed or undiagnosed sensory issues where they tend to get overloaded by too much noise or by too much movement, so visual overstimulation, those challenges can really kind of get exacerbated in a Montessori elementary classroom, especially if it's a large, bustling classroom. Most children are able to tune it out and they have good coping skills, but others aren't. The other challenge that doesn't necessarily have to do with Montessori, but just in general, some children have circadian rhythms that are not aligned with a school day. So I know several children who are homeschooled who don't really fall asleep until 10, 11, or even midnight. And then obviously they wake up at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And so their entire sleep schedule does not align naturally with the standard school day where most children have to be at school by 8 or 8:30. And now this is something that parents whose children are in school, they try really hard and they try a lot of methods to get their children to go to sleep earlier. But if this is a circadian rhythm issue, it's not going to be fixed with a pill or with turning off the lights earlier. It is a challenge that needs to be taken really into consideration when evaluating whether a school scenario is working for a child or not. And the third aspect has really nothing to do with the child. It has more to do with the practices of the school. So if you're a Montessori teacher, you are very familiar probably with the growing pressures to follow lockstep curriculums. You know, all first graders do this, all second graders do this. Even in a Montessori classroom, I've seen it very often where they will group children by age as opposed to by ability and interest and other qualifications, if you will. And so there's this issue of lockstep curriculum within Montessori. And there's also the issue of assessments, right? And so when you establish assessments in a school, you put a lot of pressure on the teacher, and then the teacher puts pressure on the students. Some students can handle that pressure really well. For other children, it can be really destructive. And because they're young, they don't have words to really put, they can't really point out what it is that's happening, what is bugging them. All they know is that things aren't going well. They just don't feel comfortable in that environment. And it shows in their behavior, in their performance, in their ability to self-regulate, to remember information, and it just becomes kind of a negative cycle. So what can you do if you notice that your child is really struggling in a Montessori environment? Well, obviously, if you've spoken to the teacher and you have plans in place, that's wonderful. That means that you have a supportive teacher that wants the best for your child. And if the school is able to support you, great. If your child is really struggling and you can homeschool, then homeschooling might be the best solution. Like I said, I cannot tell you how many children I've met in these past 2 years that I've been homeschooling my son that have very similar stories to ours, where they were struggling in the classroom, and no matter what changes the teacher tried to implement or the parents tried to do at home, the child just was not thriving. And once they shifted into homeschooling, there was a huge transformation. But I know that not everybody can homeschool. Not everybody is in the position to homeschool because parents have to work or other issues. And so what I want to recommend is that you become your child's advocate. So this doesn't mean that you're going to ask for special treatment, right? What it means is that you need to help the other adults in your child's life to see the world through the eyes of your child. You need to help them understand where your child is and create conditions that will help your child to be successful. And more than anything, we need to redefine, for these children who are struggling, we need to redefine what progress looks like and what success looks like. So for a child that is experiencing sensory overload or whose circadian rhythm does not align at all with a school schedule, success and progress are going to look very different. We need to honor that, and we need to make sure that we are celebrating this particular child for who they are, for who they're becoming, and for what they can do, and not compare them to a child who is able to function and thrive in a Montessori classroom. So if you are struggling with this kind of situation, I completely understand where you are. I feel your pain completely, and I would love to chat more. So if you want to talk about this more, drop me a note in the comments, and we will keep talking about how to support children either by shifting into a homeschool setting or empowering you to be an advocate for your child in a classroom. Take care, and I wish you a lovely week.